I ran my fingers over the yellowish keys of the old piano that stood in the corner of my music store. 73 years had left their mark on my hands. The skin was thinner, and my joints sometimes ached in the morning. But my fingers still remembered. They remembered every note, every chord I'd ever played. The morning sun of Slaughter Beach shone through the dusty windows of the Blues Note Shop, illuminating the walls hung with vintage guitars, saxophones, and old vinyl records. The store had been my sanctuary for the past 20 years, ever since jazz clubs started closing one by one, giving way to electronic music and hip-hop. I lowered myself gingerly into the worn chair in front of the piano. My knee was bothering me again, but tonight I wasn't going to let the pain dictate my terms. My fingers touched the keys and the first notes of Thelonious Monk's blues floated across the empty store. In these early hours, I had a chance to play just for myself before the rare customers showed up. Local college students looking for vintage records, or older men like me, wanting to talk about a time when music was real. Closing my eyes, I let the melody carry me away from reality. Music had always been my salvation, especially during the times when my marriage to Louise was cracking at the seams. She never understood my devotion to jazz. "You're 40 years old, Jeremiah, and you're still chasing a teenage dream," she shouted on our last night together when I returned from another club gig with empty pockets but a full heart. She left the next day, taking our 15-year-old son Ambrose with her. I didn't blame her. The woman deserved the stability I couldn't give her. But Ambrose, my boy, looked at me with such disappointment that day, as if I had failed not only his mother, but himself. The last note dissolved into thin air, and I opened my eyes, coming back to reality. It was 8:30 on the clock. It was time to open the store. This ritual had been repeated every morning for so many years that it had become as much a part of me as the music. I rose slowly, feeling my knees crunch, and walked to the door, flipping the sign from closed to open. The day promised to be quiet, like most Tuesdays. My clientele had dwindled in recent years. Young people were less and less interested in classic jazz and blues, and old customers were leaving the world one by one. Sometimes I thought that I myself would soon follow them, taking with me another piece of a dying era. The bell above the door jingled softly as the first customer of the day walked in. Otis, a gray-haired African-American man who played double bass in my band, the Midnight Shadows, back in the 80s. "What's up, old buddy?" he asked, leaning on his cane. "The same, Otis. Day to day." He nodded, understanding more than I said. "Did you get an invitation from your boy for Father's Day?" I sighed, running a hand through my thinning gray hair. "I got it yesterday. Tabitha emailed it to me. E, and I'm not sure I'm going." Otis shook his head. "Jay, you can't avoid your son forever." "I'm not sure that's my choice, friend. Ambrose has made it clear what I mean to him. This annual torture is just Tabitha's way of maintaining the appearance of a normal family. My son looks at me like I'm some museum piece he has to show his kids once a year. How are your grandchildren? Little Silas and, what's her name?" "Persephone," I answered, and there was warmth in my voice. "The girl is 16, and she seems to be the only one in the family who's really inherited the musical gene. You should hear her play the guitar." "Does Ambrose know?" I grinned unhappily. "Knows and is doing his best to nip it in the bud." "Music isn't a profession, it's a hobby," I teased my son. "Look at your grandfather. Chased a dream all his life, and what does he have?" Otis nodded understandingly. "That's cruel." "But he's right about something," I sighed, looking around my half-empty store. "What can I offer them all?" "Look at this store, Otis. It's barely afloat." "I'm barely afloat." "Ha ha, but you've always stayed true to yourself, Jay. That's worth something." I shrugged. "But for me, yeah. Not for my son, I guess." Otis stared in silence for a while at the old photos on the wall. Our band in the 80s, me with my saxophone on stage at the Blue Moon, the last jazz club to close in Slaughter Beach 10 years ago. "You know, Jay, maybe you should go. For the kids. Persephone, you say she's playing. Maybe she needs your support." I thought about it, remembering my granddaughter's glowing eyes the last time she'd tried to show me her guitar chords, and how Ambrose had interrupted us, insisting she had math homework to do. "Maybe you're right," I grudgingly agreed. After Otis left, the store fell silent again. I turned on an old John Coltrane record, letting his saxophone fill the void. My thoughts went back to the invitation. Ambrose had always been an ambitious kid. After Louise left, I'd only seen him on weekends, and with each visit I felt the wall between us grow. He wanted more than I could give him: stability, confidence in the future, the pride of a father he could introduce to his friends. Instead, he got a musician who rented a tiny apartment above a bar and often couldn't even pay for school field trips. By his 20s, Ambrose had completely alienated himself. He went to law school on a full scholarship, met Tabitha in college, and by 30 was a successful corporate lawyer. He bought a big house in upscale Slaughter Beach, had a family and everything he'd ever dreamed of. I was still a loser in his eyes. Our rare meetings always went the same way: strange smiles, polite questions about health and business, to which I gave equally polite and insincere answers. "Everything's fine, son. Business is going well." We both knew it was a lie, but we maintained that illusion. While the store was empty, I pulled out my phone and reread the invitation from Tabitha. "Dear Jeremiah, we would love to see you at the family dinner on Father's Day. Ambrose would like the whole family to get together. The kids have been asking about you. It starts at 4. Love, Tabitha." I knew Ambrose hadn't said anything like that. It was Tabitha's initiative, who, despite all her loyalty to her husband, was always trying to build bridges between us. She was a good woman, though imprisoned in the golden cage of life Ambrose had created for them. The phone in my hand vibrated, displaying a new message. It was from Persephone, and my heart involuntarily warmed. "Grandpa, are you coming on Sunday? I learned a new song and I want to show you. Please come." This little girl was a ray of light in my life. Unlike her younger brother Silas, who had adopted his father's coldness and disdain for me, Persephone had always been drawn to music and, by extension, to me. She was the only reason I still attended those agonizing family gatherings. I wrote back, "Of course, babe. Can't wait to hear your new song." Just as I hit send, the bell above the door rang again, and a young man with dreadlocks walked in, looking for a vintage bass guitar. I immersed myself in the job for a while, showing him instruments, telling stories about great bass players of the past, and enjoying a rare moment when my life made sense. When the customer walked away with a 65-year-old vintage Fender Jazz bass that had been gathering dust on my wall for years, I suddenly felt unexpectedly rich. The sale covered the rent for the next 2 months, a rare stroke of luck these days. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant routine. I went through the new arrivals of vinyl I'd bought at a sale in the suburbs, took inventory of strings and picks, dusted off the saxophones hanging on the wall. An ordinary, quiet life that gave me comfort and peace. But thoughts of my upcoming visit with my son kept me from relaxing completely. With each passing hour, the familiar tension grew, the mixture of anxiety and sadness that always accompanied thoughts of Ambrose. I could already picture his cold stare, his polite but detached greeting, his condescending comments about my store and lifestyle. Toward evening, closing up store, I decided to play some more. Today I chose not a piano, but my old saxophone, the first serious instrument I'd bought as a teenager, saving money from a part-time job at the grocery store. Its brass body held the imprints of thousands of touches from my fingers, and the sound it made was an extension of my voice. I started with slow improvisation, letting the melody develop on its own, without a plan or structure. It was my way of reflecting, of letting out all those words I could never say out loud, especially words meant for my son. "I loved you, Ambrose," my saxophone said to the empty store. "Loved you the best I knew how. Perhaps that wasn't enough. Perhaps you deserved more. But I've always been true to myself, and I hope one day you'll realize the value of that." The last note dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only silence and a barely perceptible echo in the corners of the store. I carefully placed the saxophone in its case, turned out the lights, and climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment above the store. At home, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat by the window, looking out at evening Slaughter Beach. This seaside town had long ago ceased to be a fishing village, becoming a trendy resort with expensive restaurants and boutiques. I remembered it differently, rougher, but also more sincere, as was my life. The invitation from Tabitha lay on the table next to the glass. Father's Day, a holiday that always gave me mixed feelings. I was a father who had failed his son, at least in his eyes. And now I had to face him again to confirm that fact. But Persephone would be there, and for her sake, I was willing to endure any pain. Sunday morning greeted me with sunlight streaming through the blinds. I lay in bed looking up at the ceiling and thinking about the day ahead. Father's Day, a holiday that could have been filled with warmth and joy, but for me had turned into an annual ordeal. The clock read 10 in the morning. It was 6 hours until family dinner, but anxiety had already settled somewhere around my solar plexus. I rose slowly, feeling my knees crunch. Age was taking its toll. 73 was no joke. Walking over to the small mirror in the bathroom, I examined my reflection critically. The wrinkles that covered my face told the story of my life. A story of disappointments, losses, and rare moments of happiness. The gray hair had long since thinned, but I still tried to look neat. Today was a special effort. Ambrose always noticed the smallest detail: an undone button, an unevenly tied tie, any sign that his father wasn't up to the standards of the successful lawyer he'd become. I shaved thoroughly, careful not to miss a single gray hair. I put on my best shirt, a dark blue one with a subtle pattern that I'd bought on sale 2 years ago, especially for such occasions. I completed the look with a vest and bow tie, a small tribute to my jazz past. The store was closed on Sundays, but I went down there anyway to make sure everything was in order. I always breathe easier in the quiet of an empty room. I walked over to the piano and played a few chords to calm my nerves. Music had always been my medicine. At 2 o'clock, I decided it was time to pack. I had prepared a gift for my son in advance, a first edition of a biography of Miles Davis, which I found at a bookseller in a neighboring town. Ambrose would probably never open it, but I couldn't think of anything else. What to give a man who thinks your passion is a waste of time? Ambrose's house was on the north end of Slaughter Beach, in the neighborhood known as Ocean Hills, the place where the city's most successful and wealthiest residents lived. The contrast with my humble abode above a music store in the old part of town couldn't have been more stark. I hailed a cab, another detail that surely wouldn't escape Ambrose's notice. In his world, a 73-year-old man should have his own car with a driver, not rely on public transportation or cabs. The drive took about 20 minutes. With each mile that brought me closer to my son's house, the tension grew. I clutched the packed book tighter in my lap, as if it could give me strength for the upcoming meeting. The cab pulled up in front of an imposing 2-story colonial-style house. The immaculately manicured lawn, neatly trimmed bushes, and flower beds all screamed well-being and order. There were 2 cars in the driveway, Ambrose's silver Mercedes and Tabitha's white Lexus. I paid the cabbie, leaving a generous tip, a small compensation for my own sense of inferiority, and walked to the front door. Each step was hard, as if I were walking to the scaffold instead of to a family dinner. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened, and Persephone appeared on the threshold. Her face lit up with a genuine smile when she saw me. "Grandfather!" she exclaimed, throwing herself around my neck. I hugged my granddaughter, feeling the tension recede a little. Persephone was a carbon copy of her grandmother Louise when she was young. The same expressive brown eyes, the same thick dark hair, now gathered into a high ponytail. But unlike Louise, Persephone had inherited my love of music. "How are you, my little star?" I asked, pulling back to get a better look at her. "Fine," her eyes sparkled. "I have so much to tell you. I learned that song I was talking about." "Persephone, don't keep grandfather on the doorstep." Tabitha's voice came from the back of the house. My sister-in-law appeared in the hall, a slender, elegant woman in a light blue dress, with perfect hair and barely visible makeup. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "Jeremiah, it's so good to see you," she said, coming closer and kissing my cheek. "Did you have a good trip?" "Yes, thank you, Tabitha. You look beautiful." "Oh, you're flattering," she said, but I saw her fix her hair in a satisfied manner. "Come on in. Everyone's already in the living room." I followed her through the spacious hallway and into the living room, a large room with high ceilings and panoramic windows overlooking the manicured backyard and pool. The room was tastefully furnished, but without soul. It looked like it came off the pages of an interior design magazine. Ambrose was sitting in a leather chair with a tablet in his hands. He looked up at me and nodded slightly. "Father," he said without getting up, "I'm glad you could make it." I knew it wasn't true, but I nodded back. "Thank you for the invitation, son." Silas, my 12-year-old grandson, sat on the couch, completely engrossed in his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Unlike his sister, Silas was a carbon copy of his father, the same cold blue eyes, the same expression, as if he were constantly evaluating the people around him and finding them not good enough. "Silas," Tabitha called softly, "say hello to your grandfather." The boy looked away from the screen reluctantly and gave me an indifferent look. "Hi, Grandpa," he said without enthusiasm, then went back to his work. "Hey, Silas," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "How was school?" "Fine," he mumbled, not looking at me. Ambrose put the clipboard aside and finally stood up. "Father, will you have a drink? We have a fine red wine. 2015. "Thank you, but I'll stick to water," I said. Alcohol and tense family gatherings were never a good combination. Tabitha went into the kitchen to check on dinner, and Persephone sat down next to me on the couch and began to talk about her musical successes. I listened to her with genuine interest, savoring these rare moments of genuine connection. "Mr. Raymond, my music teacher, says I have real talent," she said excitedly. "He thinks I could go to music school after high school." I noticed Ambrose's shoulders tense as he stood at the bar, pouring himself a whiskey. "Persephone, we've talked about this," he said without turning around. "Music school isn't the most reliable career path." My granddaughter rolled her eyes. "Daddy, we're not talking about careers. We're talking about education. A music education develops the brain as well as math. And yet Stanford Law School will give you a much better perspective," Ambrose countered, turning toward us. "Don't you think so, Father?" His gaze was cold, his voice defiant. He was well aware of my position on the matter, but he was deliberately dragging me into the argument. "I think," I began cautiously, "that every man should follow his calling." Ambrose grinned. "Of course you do. And where did your vocation take you? To a struggling music store in a closet-sized apartment?" "Ambrose!" Persephone exclaimed. "That's rude." My son took a sip of whiskey. "This is reality, my dear, and I want you to face it. Music is a wonderful hobby, but it's not a way to make a living. At least not for most people." I felt Persephone tense up beside me. Her hands clenched into fists, and I gently placed my palm on her hand, trying to reassure her. "Your father cares about your future," I told her. "It's okay to have different views. The important thing is to find a compromise." Ambrose raised an eyebrow. "Compromise? Interesting, coming from a man who'd never compromised for his family." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Can we not bring it up tonight, son? For the sake of the kids." Ambrose shrugged. "Whatever you say, Father. But sooner or later, we'll have to explain to them why their grandfather chose the saxophone over his family." At that moment, Tabitha came back into the room, and the atmosphere lightened a little. "Dinner is almost ready," she announced. "Ambrose, dear, will you help me with the salad?" My son obediently followed my wife into the kitchen, giving me one last cold glance. As soon as they came out, Persephone turned to me. "Grandpa, don't mind him. Papa he doesn't understand." I smiled at her, feeling both proud and sad at the same time. "It's okay, sweetheart. Your father's entitled to his opinion." "But he's wrong about you," she argued vehemently. "You're not a loser. You're a real one. And you're happy doing what you love. Isn't that more important than money?" A mocking sound came from the corner of the room. Silas had finally gotten off the phone and was looking at us with undisguised contempt. "Money is more important than being real," he said, making quotation marks with his fingers. "Grandpa lives like a bum, and you think that's cool?" "Silas!" Persephone was outraged. "How can you say that?" The boy shrugged. "Certainly, Mom. Dad always says that Grandpa is an example of how not to live. He could have become a famous musician if he was really talented, but he was stuck in this backwater, selling old guitars to tourists." It wasn't so much the content of Silas's words that struck me, but the way he copied his father's intonation. At 12, he'd already learned to look at the world through Ambrose's eyes. Cold, calculating, evaluating everything through the prism of success and money. "Everyone's definition of success is different, Silas," I said softly. "For me, it's always been about music, not money." "And that's why Grandma left you," the boy retorted with unexpected ferocity. I felt something clench inside. That wound still hurt, even after all these years. Silas, that's enough. Persephone stood up from the couch, glaring at her brother indignantly. You have no idea what you're talking about. The boy smiled, a cold, calculating smile that didn't fit his young face at all. I know more than you think I do, he said cryptically, and stared at the phone again. Persephone wanted to say something else, but at that moment Tabitha called us to the table. The dining room was as spotless as the rest of the house. A large oak table set with china and crystal, fresh flowers in the center, dimmed lights. It spoke of well-being and taste. I sat down in the seat assigned to me, feeling uncomfortable in this perfect setting. Tabitha brought a roast with vegetables and Ambrose uncorked a bottle of wine. Dinner began, at first glance, like any normal family, but the tension hung in the air, almost palpable. So Jeremiah, Tabitha began, clearly trying to make conversation. How's your store? Is business going well? Ambrose snorted, pouring wine into his glass. A vintage musical instrument store in the age of digital music? I doubt business can go well there. Actually, I replied, trying to maintain my dignity, I sold a 65-year-old Fender bass guitar this week. That's a good sale. Really? Tabitha was genuinely interested. That's great. Ambrose rolled his eyes. One sale a week isn't exactly what I'd call a thriving business. Not everyone measures success by how much money they make, Persephone said, defending me. In the real world, honey, Ambrose replied, cutting off a piece of meat. That's how success is measured. Money is freedom, security, opportunity. Everything else is romantic nonsense. Ambrose, please, Tabitha said softly. Today is Father's Day. Let's not argue. My son took a sip of wine and shrugged. I'm just stating the facts. Father always preferred to live in a fantasy world rather than reality. And where has that gotten him? At 73, he still works because he can't afford to retire. I work because I love my job, I objected. Of course, the sarcasm in Ambrose's voice was almost palpable. And that's why you missed my graduation, my wedding, and Persephone's birth. Because you loved your job too much. I felt the color of shame flood my face. I didn't miss your wedding, Ambrose. I was there. Yeah, half an hour late and left right after the ceremony because you had a gig at some second-rate bar. It wasn't a second-rate bar, I said quietly. It was the opening of a jazz festival. The only time I've ever been invited to play there. And you chose that over your only son's wedding dinner. Ambrose shook his head. Classic Jeremiah Halliburton. Tabitha put her hand on her husband's shoulder. Darling, let's not... No, Tabitha, he interrupted her. I'm tired of pretending everything's okay. My father always put his music before his family. He left my mom with a baby in his arms for his passion, and now he's sitting here trying to convince my daughter to follow in his footsteps. I'm not trying to convince anyone, I countered. I'm just looking out for her interests. Her interests, Ambrose repeated with a sneer. You don't even know what else she's interested in besides music. You see her twice a year, and you think you have the right to give her advice? I felt something breaking inside of me. All these years I had tried to be patient, to understand my son's offenses, to accept his coldness. But now looking across the table at him, I saw not a hurt child, but a cruel, cynical man who enjoyed inflicting pain. You're right, Ambrose, I said quietly. I've been a bad father. I've made a lot of mistakes. But I never, ever stopped loving you. My son grinned. Love? What do you know about love? Love is not pretty words or sentimental songs. Love is sacrifice, responsibility, presence. You had none of those things. There was a heavy silence. Even Silas, who'd been fiddling with his phone under the table the whole time, looked up, sensing the tension. Maybe dessert? Tabitha suggested tentatively, trying to lighten the mood. That's a great idea, Persephone said, giving me a concerned look. As Tabitha went to the kitchen, I noticed Silas leaning over to his father and whispering something in his ear. Ambrose nodded, and a strange smile appeared on his face. They exchanged conspiratorial glances, and I got a bad feeling. After dessert, we'll move on to presents, Ambrose announced when Tabitha returned with the cheesecake. Silas has a special surprise for Grandpa. The boy smiled, not a childish, genuine smile, but a predatory grin that didn't fit his young face at all. Yes, grandfather, he said, looking straight at me. I have something special for you. I'm sure you'll like it. There was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. I glanced at Persephone, and I could tell from her worried face that she suspected something too. Dessert passed in tense silence. I slowly ate the cheesecake, which, though it tasted perfect, seemed tasteless because of the heaviness in my chest. The looks that Ambrose and Silas were exchanging didn't bode well. Persephone sat next to me, occasionally casting concerned glances back and forth between me and my father and brother. Tabitha seemed to sense something was wrong too, but she continued to play the perfect hostess, pouring coffee and offering dessert refills. Her smile grew strained, and her eyes turned more and more to her husband, as if trying to anticipate his intentions. So, Ambrose set aside his fork and blotted his lips with his napkin. Is it time to move on to the presents? Tabitha nodded with visible relief. For her, this part of the evening probably meant a speedy end to an agonizing dinner. Of course, darling, let's move to the living room. We got up from the table and headed into the spacious room. I noticed Silas lingered to whisper something to my father, and he nodded with a barely perceptible chuckle. My anxiety grew. There was a small table in the living room under the big window, with wrapped gifts stacked neatly on it. An old piano that no one in the house ever played stood silently in the corner of the room, a tribute to tradition rather than the real interests of the family. So, Tabitha began, who's first? Let Grandpa get his presents first, Silas said quickly, his voice sounding too innocent to be sincere. Tabitha smiled at me and held out a small box wrapped in blue gift paper. It was from Ambrose and me. I carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside were expensive white gold cufflinks, obviously worth more than I made in a month. Such things were totally out of my style, but I thanked them sincerely. They're beautiful, thank you. Ambrose nodded with the look of a man who'd done an unpleasant duty. Persephone, your turn, Tabitha said. My granddaughter approached me with a poorly wrapped gift. It was clear from the shape that it was a book. I hope you like it, Grandpa. I unwrapped the paper. It was a collection of jazz standards. Not a new one, judging by the ragged pages. They didn't sell these things in the regular stores. I found it in a second-hand bookstore downtown, Persephone explained. The salesman said it belonged to some old jazz musician who had died recently. Excellent choice, I said, feeling my throat tighten with unexpected tenderness. It's a wonderful gift, darling. Persephone glowed, and Ambrose wrinkled his nose slightly, as if her gift confirmed some of his fears. Now it's my turn, Silas announced, stepping forward. He held up a brightly colored card. My heart sank. There was something about the look on his face, the way he held the card, something too careless for something that should have been done with love, that was unsettling. Silas held the card out to me with a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes. Happy Father's Day, Grandpa. I made it myself. I took the card. On the cover was an ineptly drawn saxophone, and the caption, "To the best Grandpa ever." It almost looked cute if it weren't for the strange glint in Silas's eyes. Open it, the boy insisted, and read it aloud. I want everyone to hear it. I opened the card slowly, feeling every muscle in my body tense. Inside was a poem written in neat, childish handwriting. The first lines made me freeze. Roses are red, violets are blue. You are a heavy burden. No one wants a burden like you here. I looked up from the card, meeting Silas's gaze. The boy was looking at me with challenge and some kind of eerie anticipation. Read it aloud, Grandpa, he said again, but louder. I told you, I want everyone to hear what I wrote, especially for you. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Persephone tense, and Tabitha glanced at her husband, as if looking for an explanation. Ambrose sat with a neutral expression, but I saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly in anticipation. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Roses are red, violets are blue. You're a heavy burden. No one wants a burden like you here. A heavy silence hung in the room. Then Silas jumped, covering his mouth with his hand. Ambrose grinned too, and then laughed, quietly at first, then louder and louder. Silas, Tabitha exclaimed, but there was more surprise than genuine outrage in her voice. What? The boy asked innocently. I just wrote the truth. Didn't you, Daddy? Ambrose continued to laugh, no longer hiding his pleasure. Out of the mouth of a babe, as they say. Persephone jumped up from her seat. That's disgusting, she shouted. How can you do this? Ambrose waved her away. Relax, Persephone. It's just a joke. Dad understands jokes, don't you, Dad? All eyes turned to me. I sat there, still holding the card, and felt the blood drain from my face. Years of practicing hiding my emotions on stage came in handy now. I slowly folded the card and placed it on the table next to me. Interesting rhyme, Silas, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Though traditionally the second line should end with blue, not start with that word. But that's a creative decision, of course. My calm tone seemed to confuse the boy. He was expecting tears or anger or resentment. Anything but this clinical analysis of his poetry. You didn't like it? He asked, and there was disappointment in his voice. I was just noting the technical side, I replied. As for the content, I looked directly at Ambrose. I think it reflects what you hear at home. Children often repeat the words of adults. Ambrose stopped laughing, his face darkening. Don't pass the buck, Father. Silas just sees things as they are. He sees things through his father's eyes, I corrected him gently. Just like you once saw me through your mother's eyes. Leave your mother out of this, Ambrose said sharply. She never spoke ill of you, even when she should have. I nodded, recognizing the validity of his words. You're right. Louise was always more generous than I deserved. There was silence in the room again. Silas shifted his gaze from me to his father, clearly disappointed that his cruel joke hadn't had the desired effect. Tabitha fidgeted nervously with the pearl necklace around her neck. I rose slowly from the chair and made my way to the piano in the corner of the room. In the few steps that separated me from the instrument, I made a decision, not to let them see my pain, not to give them that satisfaction. Sitting down at the piano, I opened the lid. The instrument had obviously not been tuned in a while, but it was still in acceptable condition. I put my fingers on the keys and began to play. Slowly, quietly, fumbling for a melody. A simple blues progression, nothing special. But then I started improvising, turning this basic chord sequence into something more complex and emotional. And then I sang along, using the words from Silas' postcard as the basis for the improvised blues. Roses are red, yes, violets are blue. You say I'm a burden. You don't need me. But listen, son, life is long and pain doesn't always stay forever. My voice, low and husky from age and thousands of nights spent in smoke-filled jazz clubs, filled the room. I didn't look at their faces, completely immersed in the music, letting my fingers and voice express what I could never put into words. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. Persephone stood up and walked toward the stairs. She returned a moment later, holding an acoustic guitar. Without a word, she sat down next to me and began to play along, picking up my improvisation with surprising intuition. We played together, grandfather and granddaughter, turning a cruel joke into something beautiful. Persephone added her own melodic lines, complementing my chords, creating an unexpectedly harmonious duet. I risked a glance at the rest of the family. Silas's face was a mixture of confusion and disappointment. His bomb hadn't exploded, but had turned into something else entirely. Tabitha listened with surprise and something akin to admiration. But Ambrose, his face darkened with anger. He sat there, fists clenched, looking as if I had committed an unforgivable betrayal by turning his triumph into my own performance. Persephone and I continued to play, letting the music speak for us. It was changing, evolving, moving from sad blues to something lighter and more optimistic. I improvised a new verse. Youth doesn't know what lies ahead, thinks old age is the end of the road. But each of us carries his own light in his soul, and my music sounds through the darkness of past years. Persephone picked up the melody, adding her own notes to it, her own youthful energy. Her fingers moved across the strings with a confidence I hadn't expected to see. She was truly talented, not just passionate about music, but truly gifted. I could feel it in every note she extracted from her guitar. Music connected us, creating a bridge across the generational chasm through years of hurt and misunderstanding. In that moment, it didn't matter what Ambrose or Silas thought. There was only Persephone and me, and the music that flowed between us like a living conversation. When we finished playing, there was a silence in the room, but a different silence than before. It was a silence of amazement, not tension. Wow, Tabitha said quietly. That was really beautiful. Silas sat open-mouthed, clearly not expecting this turn of events. His whole cruel postcard thing hadn't turned out the way he'd planned. Ambrose stood up abruptly. What was that just now? His voice was quiet but full of rage. It's called jazz improvisation, I replied calmly, closing the piano lid. The art of turning a negative into something positive. No, Ambrose shook his head. It's called manipulation. You've always done it, always turning your failures into some romantic story about a misunderstood artist. Persephone put the guitar aside. Dad, stop it. It was beautiful, and you know it. Beautiful? Ambrose looked at his daughter in disbelief. He had taken the insult and used it to show how talented and misunderstood he was. A classic tactic. Or maybe, Tabitha said quietly, he just did what all good musicians do. Turned pain into art? Ambrose turned to his wife, clearly surprised that she hadn't backed him up. Anna, didn't you say yesterday that you were tired of his constant excuses and his being a bad influence on Persephone? Tabitha blushed. I never said he was a bad influence on her. I said I was worried about her future if she chose the same unstable path. Same result, Ambrose cut off. And now you're protecting him? I'm not defending anyone, Tabitha said tiredly. I'm just saying it was beautiful. Can't you just admit it without turning it into another battle? Ambrose clenched his jaw, clearly holding back his anger. All right, he said at last. It was beautiful. Satisfied, Father? You won again. You made me look petty and soulless again, and yourself a noble sufferer. I shook my head. There are no winners or losers here, son. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I was just doing what I do best, playing music. Of course, Ambrose grinned bitterly. You were just playing music, like when you missed my graduation, like the time you forgot my mom's birthday, like always when you chose your precious music over your family. There was so much lingering pain in his words that I felt something clench inside. Ambrose, I said quietly, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I regret every one of them. But music isn't just a job or a hobby for me. It's a part of me, my way of expressing what I feel. A convenient excuse, he parried. What about just being a father? It's never been a part of you? Persephone stepped between us. Dad, please stop it. You set this whole thing up on purpose, didn't you? That card? You wanted to humiliate Grandpa on Father's Day? Ambrose didn't answer, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. I can't believe it. Persephone shook her head. You taught us to respect our elders, to be kind, and you put Silas up to this? Don't exaggerate, Persephone, Ambrose said, looking away. It was just a joke. A joke? Persephone looked at him in disbelief. In what world is that considered a joke? Silas, who'd been quiet after our musical performance, now perked up again. Come on, Percy. Don't be such a drag. Grandpa said it was cool. Didn't he, Grandpa? I looked at my youngest grandson, the boy who had been taught to despise me without really knowing me. What I really think is cool, Silas, is the way your sister plays the guitar. She has real talent. Persephone smiled at me, grateful for the encouragement. Ambrose snorted. Oh, here we go. The great Jeremiah Halliburton delivers his musical verdict, as if that's worth anything in the real world. It means a lot to me, Persephone said quietly. Of course it does, sweetheart, Ambrose said with a visible effort to soften his tone. I know you love music, and that's fine, as a hobby, but Grandpa's trying to indoctrinate you that it could be a career, and that's just irresponsible, I finished for him. Like something I've always chosen? Exactly, Ambrose nodded. I just don't want my daughter to repeat your mistakes. What if they aren't mistakes? I objected. What if it's just a different path? The path that led you to being single at 73, with a barely surviving business and no retirement savings. Ambrose shook his head. No, thank you. I want more for my daughter. More than passion? More than loyalty to herself? More than poverty and disappointment, Ambrose almost shouted. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. You judge by material standards, son, but there are some things you can't measure with money. Oh, please, Ambrose rolled his eyes. Spare us your hippie philosophy. We all know that at the end of the day, bills need to be paid with real money, not philosophical musings about the beauty of art. I looked at my son, a successful, confident man who had achieved everything he dreamed of, and yet was filled with so much bitterness. What had I done wrong? Where exactly had I lost him? "You're right, Ambrose," I said at last. "Bills have to be paid, and I've always paid mine as best I could. Maybe not as generously as you'd like, but I've never asked for help or lived off the books." "Oh, what an achievement," Ambrose said sarcastically. "You've been paying your own bills. Would you like a medal for that?" "Ambrose, that's enough," Tabitha interjected. "This is getting out of hand." Tabitha tried to diffuse the situation by offering tea, but the tension in the room was too strong to be alleviated by the usual social rituals. I could feel the fatigue building inside me, not physical, but emotional, as if this day had sucked the last of my strength out of me. Silas, clearly disappointed that his card hadn't had the desired effect, was back on his phone, occasionally casting curious glances at us. Tabitha was fidgeting, trying to create a semblance of normality, and Persephone was sitting next to me, her face a look of restrained anger. Ambrose stood at the window, his back to us, his tense posture betraying the storm of emotion raging inside. It was Persephone who broke the heavy silence. "I want to understand," she said, looking at her father's back. "Did you come up with this joke with the card?" Ambrose did not turn around. "Don't dramatize it, Persephone. It was just a silly joke." "You didn't answer my question," she insisted. "Was it your idea?" Ambrose finally turned to us, his face taking on that look of professional calm he must have used in the courtroom. "Silas and I were discussing Father's Day, and I mentioned that your grandfather always valued honesty." Silas decided to be honest. "Liar," Persephone said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" Ambrose raised an eyebrow. "You're lying, Daddy," she repeated louder. "Silas couldn't have come up with this on his own. You indoctrinated him that Grandpa was a burden, and then you coaxed him into making that cruel card." Silas looked up from the phone. "Actually," he started but stopped talking when Ambrose gave him a warning glance. "See?" Persephone pointed at her brother. "Even Silas can't back up your lies." Ambrose sighed as if dealing with an annoying child. "Okay, I suggested Silas write something unconventional, something to shake things up. These family dinners are always so tense and fake." "Whose fault is that?" Persephone asked. "Don't start," Ambrose warned. "You're too young to understand the whole story." "Then explain it to me." Persephone stood up, her eyes burning with defiance. "Explain why you hate your own father so much that you're willing to humiliate him even on Father's Day." I put my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. "Persephone, you shouldn't—" "No, grandfather," she pulled away. "I want to know. I'm tired of this reticence, this tension every time you two are in the same room." Ambrose stared at his daughter for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "Good. You want to know the truth? Here it is. Your grandfather chose music over his family. He chose his gigs at cheap bars over my mother's birthday party. He chose jam sessions over my high school plays. He chose his passion instead of providing us with a steady income and security for the future." I listened without interrupting. Everything Ambrose said was the truth, the painful, bitter truth. "When Mama finally couldn't stand it and left him," Ambrose went on, "he didn't even fight for us. He let her go, let her take me, and all he cared about was whether he could still play his damn jazz." "That's not true," I said quietly. "I loved you both." "But not enough to change," Ambrose parried. "Not enough to become a responsible, stable father and husband." "I couldn't change who I was," I replied. "And I don't think Louise wanted me to. She knew who she was marrying." "She thought you would grow up," Ambrose exclaimed. "That this obsession with music would go away when you had a family. But it didn't. You're still the same selfish dreamer." Tabitha walked over to her husband and put her hand on his shoulder. "Ambrose, maybe enough is enough." He shook off her hand. "No, Persephone wanted to know the truth. So let her find out what her grandfather was really like before she decided to follow in his footsteps." Persephone crossed her arms over her chest. "What was he like? Tell me, Papa. What is he really like?" "Irresponsible," Ambrose began, his voice growing louder. "Selfish. A man who has subordinated his entire life to the meaningless pursuit of a dream that will never come true. A man who would rather let his family starve than give up his musical ambitions. We never starved, Ambrose, I said softly. It was hard, yes, but I always brought money home. Not enough, he shouted. There was never enough. Mom worked double shifts to pay for my school while you chased your music career. And in the end, nothing. No fame, no recognition, just a shabby record store and a life in the apartment above it. Silas looked at his father with wide open eyes. He'd probably never seen him like this before. Face red with rage, eyes glittering frantically. And you want my daughter to follow the same path? Ambrose continued, turning to me. You want her to waste her talent and her youth in pursuit of a musical career that will almost certainly end in failure? Number, I will not let her make the same mistake. Persephone approached her father, her face contorted with anger and pain. It's not your decision, Dad. It's my life, my decision. You're 16, Ambrose cut off. Sakran Kirman, you have no idea what you're talking about. I know I love music, Persephone said firmly. I know I want to study it, to grow in it. As a hobby, please, Ambrose said, but you'll get your basic education in a field that will give you a stable future. Like law, Persephone grinned. To make me as miserable as you? A heavy silence hung in the room. Ambrose looked at his daughter as if she had struck him. I am not unhappy, he said at last. I have everything I've ever dreamed of. Stability, respect, the ability to provide for my family. And you hate every minute of it, Persephone said quietly. I see you come home every night, tired, frustrated, devastated. I hear you playing the piano in the middle of the night when you think everyone is asleep. Now it was Ambrose's turn to look caught. He threw a quick glance at Tabitha, who looked at him in surprise. Do you play the piano? She asked. You said you gave up a long time ago. Sometimes, Ambrose admitted reluctantly. When I can't sleep, it doesn't mean anything. I looked at my son, seeing him in a new way. All these years, I'd thought he'd completely rejected music, completely rejected the part of himself that was like me. But it was still there, repressed, hidden, but alive. Ambrose, I said softly, why didn't you ever tell me you were still playing? Because it doesn't matter, he cut me off. It's just a way to relax, nothing more. It's so much more than that, Dad, Persephone said. And you know it, I've heard you. You play like your soul is bursting. Ambrose turned away, his shoulders tense. That's enough. This conversation is over. No, it isn't, Persephone insisted. You don't hate grandfather because he chose music over family. You hate him because he had the courage to follow his passion, and you did not. Ambrose turned sharply, his face contorted with rage. Now, Warren, don't you dare speak to me like that. You know nothing of life, of real hardship, of sacrificing what you love for those you love. Maybe I don't, Persephone agreed, but I do know that I don't want to live a life of regret like you do. Ambrose raised his hand, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit his daughter, but instead he clenched his fist and lowered it. Go to your room, he said through gritted teeth. Now. Persephone didn't move. No, I'll stay here with grandfather. Persephone, I said softly, maybe you really should go upstairs. Your father and I need to talk. This conversation is over, Ambrose cut off. I want you to leave, Father, right now. Tabitha gave her husband a surprised look. Ambrose, can't you just… Ha ha ha. I can, he interrupted. This is my house and I decide who stays and who goes. I rose slowly, feeling my knees ache. This day had been even harder than I'd expected. All right, son, I'll leave. No, Grandpa, Persephone exclaimed, grabbing my arm. Don't let him treat you like that. I smiled softly at my granddaughter. It's all right, Persephone. Your father is right. This is his home, and I think we all need a little time to cool down. I headed for the exit, trying to maintain my dignity despite the pain in my knees and the even greater pain in my heart. Persephone followed me, throwing my father a look of indignation. In the hallway, I picked up my hat and cane. The latter I usually avoided using in front of my son, not wanting to look old and infirm in his eyes, but now I didn't care. I'll call you a cab, Grandpa, Persephone said, pulling out her cell phone. Thank you, sweetheart. As we waited for the car, Persephone suddenly lowered her voice. Grandpa, I want to take lessons from you. Music lessons. Daddy can't know. I looked at her determined face, at the fire in her eyes so similar to the one that had once burned in her grandmother's eyes. Are you sure this is a good idea? Your father will be very angry if he finds out. I don't care, she said firmly. I want to learn from you. You're the only one who understands what music means to me. I hesitated. On the one hand, I did not want to further aggravate the already strained relationship with my son. On the other hand, I saw in Persephone a real talent, a fire that could not be extinguished. All right, I finally agreed. But we have to be careful. Persephone glowed. I can come to your store after school. I'll say I'm studying in the library or with friends. I don't know, Persephone. Lying never leads to anything good. It's not a lie, she objected. It's privacy. I have a right to my own interests. I sighed, realizing it was useless to argue. I'd been the same way when I was 16, sure that I knew what I wanted out of life and was willing to fight for it. Okay, Tuesday and Thursday after school, but only for an hour. I don't want your grades to suffer. She hugged me happily. Thank you, Grandpa. You won't regret it. At that moment, a cab pulled up and we went outside. The day was winding down, painting the sky over Slaughter Beach in shades of pink and gold. See you Tuesday, Persephone whispered, helping me into the car. I'll bring my guitar. It had been almost 3 months since that ill-fated Father's Day. Autumn had painted Slaughter Beach gold and purple, bringing cool winds and early darkness. Our classes with Persephone became a real source of joy for me. Twice a week, like clockwork, she showed up at my store with her guitar behind her back and her eyes burning. Her progress was amazing. What other students took years to learn, she grasped in weeks. For this Thursday, we were working on a complex jazz composition. I sat at the piano, showing her harmonic sequences, and she played along on the guitar, creating her own melodic lines. We were so absorbed in the music that we didn't hear the bell over the door ring, didn't notice someone enter the store. It was only when a harsh voice cut through our melody that we froze. So this is where you disappear on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Ambrose stood in the doorway of the back room, his face pale with rage. In his hand, he clutched Persephone's cell phone. Daddy! Persephone jumped up, her guitar making a discordant sound. What are you doing here? You explain that to me, Ambrose hissed. Why did you lie to me about studying in the library with your friend? I rose slowly from my seat, my heart thudding. Ambrose, listen. No, Father, he interrupted me. I don't want to hear your excuses. You lied to me behind my back. You taught my daughter against my will. It's not his fault, Persephone exclaimed. It was my idea. I asked Grandfather to tutor me. And he agreed. Ambrose shifted his gaze to me. Knowing that I was against it, knowing that I didn't want you wasting your time with this. He hesitated, searching for a word. This futile endeavor. Music is not an endeavor, Dad. Persephone stepped forward, her voice trembling with restrained anger. It's what I love. It's what I'm good at. And how do you know that? Ambrose asked. Because Grandpa said so? A man who spent his whole life deluding himself into thinking he had talent? It was cruel, and I saw Persephone flinch as if from a blow. Don't you dare talk about him like that, she said quietly but firmly. Grandfather is a true musician, and he believes in me. Ambrose laughed bitterly. Of course he does. You're his chance for redemption, his way of proving he was right to choose music over family. If he can convince you to follow in his footsteps, then his choice was justified. I shook my head, feeling how deeply his words hurt me. You're wrong, son. I would never use Persephone in such a way. I just see her talent and passion, and I don't want them stifled like what? Ambrose took a step toward me. How did you stifle my talent? Is that what you were going to say? I didn't see this coming. All this time I'd thought Ambrose hated music because of me, and it turned out he blamed me for not supporting his own interest in it. I didn't know you wanted to pursue music, I said quietly. You never said. Because you never asked, Ambrose shouted, and there was such a lingering pain in his voice that I felt my heart clench. You were too busy with your gigs, your dreams. You didn't even notice that I played your piano every time you left. that I was learning from your sheet music, that I wanted to be like you. There was a heavy silence. I looked at my son, a successful, respected lawyer, father of two, and I saw him as a little boy craving his father's attention, a boy I couldn't see through the veil of my own ambition. Ambrose, I began, but he held up his hand, stopping me. Don't, he said more quietly. It's too late for this conversation. I made my choice a long time ago, and I won't let you do the same to my daughter. He turned to Persephone. Pack your things, we're leaving. Persephone didn't move from her seat. No, she said calmly. I'm not going with you. Persephone, Ambrose said, a note of warning in his voice. Don't make me say it again. I'm not a child, Papa, she objected. I'm 16. I have the right to decide what I want to do in my spare time. As long as you live under my roof, I have to follow your rules, Persephone interrupted, even if they don't make sense, even if they prevent me from growing in what I love. Ambrose took a deep breath, clearly trying to contain his anger. This is not up for discussion. I forbid you to take lessons from your grandfather, and I forbid you to come here without my knowledge. Swornera, then I'll come with your knowledge, Persephone parried. I'll tell you every time I'm going to class, because I'm not going to give up music. Percy, I said softly, using her pet nickname, maybe you should listen to your father. We can find a compromise. What kind of compromise? She asked bitterly. He wants me to give up music completely as something serious. He wants me to do it as a hobby, in between studying for law school and other appropriate activities. Ambrose rubbed the bridge of his nose like he was getting a migraine. I just want a better future for you, Persephone. A stable, successful one. But you don't ask what I want, she countered. You're projecting your unfulfilled dreams and unresolved conflicts with Grandpa onto me. Her words hit the mark. Ambrose looked as if he'd been slapped. It's not true, he said, but his voice sounded less confident. It is, Persephone said softly. Daddy, I can see how unhappy you are, how exhausted you are at a job you hate, how you play the piano at night because it's the only time you can be yourself. I don't want that kind of life. Ambrose was silent, his face impenetrable, but I could see his hands trembling, a sign of the intense inner turmoil I remembered from his childhood. You are too young to understand, he said at last. The life of a musician is not a romantic fairy tale. It's hard work with little reward and constant uncertainty about the future. I know that, Persephone nodded. Grandfather doesn't hide the hardships from me, but he also shows me that when you do what you love, those difficulties become part of the journey, not an obstacle. Ambrose looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a strange mixture of anger and envy. You indoctrinated her with these ideas. You did to her what you tried to do to me. I didn't indoctrinate her, I replied calmly. I was just helping her develop her own talent and passion, what any teacher should do. Or any father, Persephone added quietly. Ambrose flinched as if her words had physically hurt him. You don't understand, he said bitterly. I'm trying to protect you from disappointment and pain. No, Papa, Persephone shook her head. You're trying to protect yourself from your own disappointments. You're projecting your experiences onto me. Ambrose was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice sounded tired and broken. I can't argue with you anymore. If you want to spend your life chasing a pipe dream, I can't stop you, but I won't support it, and I don't want you to come here. You can't stop me from seeing my grandfather, Persephone objected. I can, as long as you're underage, Ambrose retorted, and I forbid it. He turned to me, his eyes cold as ice. And you, Father, if you have any respect for me as a parent, you will abide by my rules. No music lessons for Persephone, no secret meetings, no inciting disobedience. I looked at my son and felt a deep, overpowering weariness. All my life I had hoped that one day we would find common ground, that time would heal the wounds of the past. But now I realize those wounds were too deep. I respect your right to make rules for your children, Ambrose, I said slowly. But I can't respect a decision that is based on fear and unprocessed grievances. You're depriving Persephone of something important, not because it's bad for her, but because it reminds you of your own unfulfilled dreams. Ambrose gritted his teeth. Don't you dare lecture me on parenting, not after all you've done, or rather, not done, as a father. You're right, I agreed. I was a bad father. I put my ambitions ahead of your needs, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean you have to make the same mistakes I did, just in a different direction. I'm not repeating your mistakes, Ambrose cut him off. I'm correcting them. No, Papa, Persephone said quietly. You're making new mistakes. You think you're protecting me, but you're really suffocating me. Ambrose looked at his daughter for a long moment. Something in his face had changed, anger giving way to weariness, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. We'll talk about this at home, he said at last. Come on. Persephone gave me a desperate look. I gave her a barely perceptible nod, saying wordlessly, Go. We'll find a solution. She reluctantly put the guitar in its case and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned around. I'll be back, Grandpa, she said with a determination that reminded me of my own youth. No matter what happens, I will not give up music. Ambrose did not say a word of farewell. He simply followed his daughter out, leaving me alone in the silence of the store. I sank slowly into the chair by the piano, feeling the years weighing on my shoulders. This breakup seemed final. I had lost my son years ago, but today I realized it with a new, painful clarity. A week passed without word from Persephone. I didn't call or write for fear of aggravating the situation further. The store seemed empty without her presence, without the sound of her guitar and her young tinkling laughter. I spent my days in chores and my evenings at the piano, trying to express in music the pain and regret I could not put into words. On the 8th day, as I was closing up store, the bell above the door tinkled softly. I turned around and saw Persephone. She stood on the doorstep without her guitar, her face tired but determined. Grandfather, she said, taking a step inside, I have something to tell you. I gestured for her to sit down. What's wrong, Percy? Your father... I talked to him, she interrupted me. Long and serious. We yelled at each other, cried again, and finally we heard each other. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. And what conclusion did you come to? Compromise, she said with a slight smile. I'll study for law school like he wants me to, but I'll also continue to study music and apply to the Berklee School of Music. And Ambrose agreed to that? Not right away, Persephone admitted. But when I told him I'd leave home if I didn't, he knew I was serious. Would you really leave? I asked, surprised by her determination. She nodded without hesitation. Yes, I would have come to you. Would you have accepted me? Of course, I answered softly. But I'm glad it didn't come to that. Persephone pulled a folded piece of paper out of her bag. Daddy wrote this for you. He didn't want to come himself, but he said you should read it. I took the note with some trepidation. Ambrose's handwriting was exactly as I remembered it. Crisp, neat, with sharp corners. Father, the note read, I can't change the past, and I will probably never be able to forgive you completely for the years I felt abandoned. But I also cannot deny that I see in Persephone the same passion for music that I once saw in you, and perhaps in myself. I will allow her to continue to take lessons from you, provided she takes her academic pursuits just as seriously. I will not prevent her from applying to music school, though I make no promise of financial support if she enrolls. It's her choice and her responsibility. As for you and me, I don't think we can ever have the relationship you may have wanted. Too much water has passed, but for Persephone's sake, I'm willing to honor the truce. Ambrose. I finished reading the note and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Not reconciliation, but a truce. Not forgiveness, but acceptance. Maybe that was the best I could hope for. Did he really say he sees the same passion in me that he sees in you? Persephone asked, peering over my shoulder. I smiled, folding the note. Yes, and that's the biggest compliment he could give. He's changed, Grandpa, Persephone said seriously. After we talked, it's as if something has let go of him. Last night I heard him playing the piano, not secretly in the middle of the night, but openly in the living room. Mom was shocked. I pictured the scene. Ambrose at the piano, Tabitha watching in wonder, music filling a house that had been deprived of her for too long. And Silas? I asked, remembering my youngest grandson. Persephone shrugged. He's still acting like a little asshole, but I noticed he listened to Daddy play. Maybe in time. She didn't finish her sentence, but I understood her point. Time heals even the deepest wounds. Not always completely, not always without scars, but it does. So, I said, smiling at my granddaughter, did you bring your guitar? No, she shook her head. But I thought we could play the piano together. You said you wanted to teach me to boogie woogie. I laughed and shifted on the bench, making room for her. Let's give it a try. Persephone sat down next to me, and I began to show her the basic rhythmic pattern of the left hand, the same wandering octave that was the foundation of boogie woogie. She quickly picked up on it, and soon we were playing four-handed, filling the empty store with energetic, life-affirming music. At that moment, I felt a strange peace. Yes, I had lost my son, perhaps forever. Yes, my life had not turned out the way I had dreamed of when I was young. But sitting here, next to Persephone, passing on my art, my passion, my story to her, I felt that all was not in vain. The music had continued through the generations, despite the ruptures and conflicts, and there was a harmony to it, a truth to it. You know, Persephone said when we finished playing, I think Daddy will come here one day. Maybe not soon, but he will. And you'll play together, like we are now. I smiled, not wanting to ruin her optimism, though I didn't share it completely. Maybe, I said. In the meantime, I have you, and that's more than I deserve. Persephone shook her head. No, grandfather. You deserve so much more than that. You deserve to be understood and accepted for who you are, with all your music, with all your mistakes and triumphs. Her words touched me to the core. I hugged my granddaughter, feeling tears come to my eyes. Thank you, Percy, for seeing me. Always, Grandpa, she whispered. Always. We sat like that for a while, then turned back to the piano. Without words, as if by unspoken agreement, we began to play, not boogie-woogie this time, but a slow, thoughtful melody that I improvised and Persephone picked up and developed. Our music flowed like a river, connecting past to present, healing old wounds, creating new possibilities. Outside the window, dusk was falling, coloring Slaughter Beach in the warm tones of sunset. But inside my little store was music, timeless, passing from generation to generation like the most precious gift.